Hey everybody, welcome to Kent with Bent number 148, Master Kent in the Metallic Armor, which is of course based on the Season 3, I believe, episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Master Vile and the Metallic Armor, which introduces the Metallic Armor for like 3 or 4 episodes, and it's just gone forever, all to justify Metallic Armor toys, which yes, I did have some of back when I was growing up with my human family. Bent, how are you?
I'm doing well. I put this tutu on about 10 seconds ago.
You did. It was a very close call. Yeah. So first, let's let everyone know why are you wearing a tutu? It's an unusual thing for someone to wear.
Yeah, we made a donation incentive during the last event.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can do that again, I'll wear the pink tutu again next time.
Nice. All right. Well, the donation incentive is up here, and also, if we get it high enough, somewhere around 101%, Bent gets free pizza. So if y'all want Bent to get free pizza, you know how to do it. And it's free for him, it's not free for me, I just buy him pizza, is what that means.
Yay, pizza!
Yep, so the goal is if you get it to Fancy Avatar at 100%, Bent will wear a tutu next time, and I will also add one to the queue for the Fancy Avatar polls. I have not been using the polls during October, because during October I use my spooky avatars for my scripted videos, so, you know, I can't bump that just for that, but I will have a series of, at this point, I believe, such polls afterwards, and if we have another one, hey, 3. So, that being said, we are primarily here not to talk about why Kent or Bent has a tutu or, you know, things like that. Instead, we are here to take a look at the nonsense claims of Kent Hovind, have a few drinks, and have a good time hanging out with chat and pointing out what Kent gets wrong, all that fun stuff, nonsense. I don't know, both. So, that being said, before we get going, Bent, do you have anyone you want to thank?
Yes, I wanted to thank Joshua Geese, or guys, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, for getting me at least 3 items off my Amazon wishlist. I did receive 7 items, but only 3 notes. So I think Joshua sent all 7. That is super generous. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, let's go over the drinking rules. All right, so first, we will take a drink anytime Kent Hovind says something that's so stupid, just kind of have to, in order to cool our brains down. That is the whole, you know, like, brain coolant idea. Now, we will all still take a drink anytime Kent tells a joke that doesn't land. I can definitely talk today. Or tells a story that didn't happen. So this is going to be a bit of a, you know, judgment call kind of thing. But if Ken starts going on about how, like, you know, he was on an airplane with a professor of apparently nothing in particular, who was, you know, an evolutionist, and how Kent totally defeated that guy in a debate on the plane, and then everyone clapped, yeah, we're going to take a drink for that. So, you know, if it sounds like it should go on r/thathappened, we take a drink for it. We'll also take a drink if Kent Hovind references that political party that was really popular in Germany in like the 1930s into the 1940s. Now, this is not the Godwin's Law drink trigger. We don't actually have one of those. Because remember, in Godwin's Law, it's when you compare someone or their policies or their arguments to those of that particular political party. The one, you know, run by the little toothbrush mustache man. That one. Instead, all he has to do is bring them up at all. He doesn't actually have to compare anyone to them. So, just because he likes to bring them up all the time. We'll also take a drink anytime Kent Hovind well, actually, one time per stream, if Kent Hovind mixes up what we can know about Lucy, the Australopithecus afarensis, with what we can know of her and any larger taxon to which she belongs. So, for instance, if he says, oh, hey, we can't know if Lucy's species had human-like feet with an inline big toe, because Lucy wasn't found with feet, well, guess what? Other Australopithecus were, so that's not important. That's a ad hominid. We will also drink for what we call Trojan source. If Kent Hovind cites a source and we check the source, and not only does it fail to support him, which almost certainly will, but instead it actively argues against him, then we will take a drink for Trojan source. We will also take a drink if either Bent or I can successfully predict what Kent Hovind is about to say. We will also be taking a drink for a number of reasons that you guys can cause, such as Anyone who super chats or membership milestone chats anything to the effect that answers in Genesis or AIG is a bag of dicks. We'll take a drink for that. We already got one of those. I'll read it right afterwards. We'll also take a drink if anyone super chats or milestone membership chats anything with any of our 3 kaiju emojis that we have just for channel members. If you want to get access to those, hit the join button. Starts at $1.99 a month, and you get access to all those cool channel emojis. Or you could just wait for someone to be generous and gift you a membership. Because we will also take drinks for each gifted membership up until the 20 point. Once it goes to the 50, because you can buy them in increments of 1, 5, 10, 20, and 50. Yeah, I'm just going to finish this drink that I'm drinking, which is in fact a Baja Blast, except instead of caffeine, it has booze. Bent, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking a Baja Blast that instead of booze, it has caffeine.
All right. So, I think I've covered all of our drink triggers. Have I missed any?
If Dapper is a professional?
Dapper's a professional, that's right. If I screw up the production, we will take a drink for that. Now, it has to actually be me screwing it up. If something crashes, or the internet goes out, or YouTube does something stupid, that's not me. That's the technology, and that's not a Dapper's a professional. But if I say, fail to unmute Bent, well, then there you go. That's a Dapper's a professional. Now we have a few things to read. One, Carrie Bronson for $5 says, preemptive Godzilla roar of rage for the first time. He self-identifies as a science teacher. Yeah. Rail Gatubello for $2 says, AIG is a bag of things Kent Hovind took in prison. I'll take a drink. I'll also point out how horribly, horribly disturbing it is that the fact that SA in prison is so common and ubiquitous in U.S. prisons that it's just a joke. So, Belen Hovind full relation for 100 Argentinian pesos says the low saturation really emphasizes Lil Cuz's ghoulish soul. So here's the thing with the low saturation. That's actually something I'm doing to it. If you look at it without that, it looks like this. Which is just no, I'm not looking at that. So I have applied a color correction to it to get rid of the ridiculousness of how yellow it is, although it still is almost entirely yellow, so I can't get rid of all of it. So Freemonger says, does Hard Mountain Dew not have caffeine? It does not. It does not, in fact, have caffeine. Nor does it have sugar. Basically, it's a malt beverage with with basically Mountain Dew syrup added to it without caffeine. That's basically all it is. And it's apparently the Diet Mountain Dew syrup because it doesn't have sugar, so okay. Although, look, it's got alcohol, which is going to break down into simple sugars eventually, so it's not like it doesn't have calories, because there's no such thing, sorry, as a 0-calorie alcoholic beverage. That's just not a thing. It's got alcohol, it's got calories, so do not think this is a diet option where you're just not going to have calories. All right, well, when last we left off, Kent Hovind was telling us how he had made up bits about Genesis in which God spoke the world into existence, which isn't something in Genesis, but it's pretty common belief from people who don't spend a whole lot of time reading Genesis, instead spend a lot of time talking about their systematic theology that's somewhat divorced from the text. That God spoke everything into existence, even though that is not what it says in the text. We're going to continue on with Kent telling us that. So, yeah. Dapper, are you going to be more... Or, sorry, not Dapper. Bent, I'm Dapper. Bent, are you going to be any more ready in the next few minutes than you are right now?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
All right, here we go.
And the earth standing out of the water and in the water. Now, I don't know of another way to explain that other than there was a canopy of water above the atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, that is what the text is implying, right? Because you got to remember that the creation narrative is being composed by people who think that the way the Earth works is that there's a flat disk of the Earth surrounded by an ocean with a dome over it that keeps the cosmic waters above out, and the ground and the bottom of the ocean keeps the cosmic waters of below the Earth out. And Earth is essentially just a floating bubble inside of an infinite ocean, above which God sits on his throne. And so, yeah, they did believe in a water canopy. But Kent, it's not a good thing for your position. The fact that the ancient Hebrews believed in physically impossible things that just aren't true isn't a good reason for you to believe in that thing. Glenn Hope in full relation, 100 Argentinian pesos says, I want to address the rumors. Yes, the reason there's a branch of the Hovind family not Vence, he's not related. Here in Argentina is because of the aforementioned German Politische Party. So, okay. In case you don't know, yeah, there were a whole lot of Germans who fled to Argentina following this little conflict called World War II. You might have heard of it. And yeah, that's just a thing. Roshina Ice Canopy Greenhouse Keller for $1.99 says, wouldn't that make the Earth really hot? It would make the Earth really hot, and I feel like we're going to talk about that. Kent usually talks about how, like, it becomes this one uniformly warm, high moisture or high humidity, like, tropical greenhouse thing, and it's great for plant life and whatnot. So yeah, he does like to talk about that, so I do think we are going to talk about that. Chesh says, were they even German though? So Kent's family, the Hovens, are not German. I believe they are Norwegian, if I remember correctly. He mentions it a few times. I believe he says they're Norwegian. So.
Some have argued this phrase is only talking about some of the land was sticking out of the water and some of the land was under the water.
I disagree. I think Kent is actually right about the interpretation of this passage. I just don't think it helps him much.
I really think that the model that there was water under the crust and then a layer of dirt for them to stand on, which we'll show you in a minute, maybe 10 miles or so of rock or crust of the earth, and then water that God separated into high and low places at the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1.
So basically he's trying to explain hydroplate theory along with a water canopy. The problem is that he's now just compounding two physically impossible models of the Earth. And when I say physically impossible, I mean, like, we know what the physics of these situations would be, and they just can't exist like that for any amount of time. Let's see. Rail Gachibella for $2 says, ironically, Norway is a famously secular country. I feel like it probably wasn't back when the Hovens were living there, though. All that being said, I do think that Kent has said that his immediate family were not particularly religious. So, I mean, I don't know. But also, you can't really just assume someone's a religious affiliation or religiosity based on, broad trends in their ancestral country of origin. So, anyway, the impossibilities. So, first of all, you can't have a solid sphere over the Earth, right? Because that's what it would have to be if the Earth is a globe, which Kent thinks it is. I say thinks it is because he doesn't know it is, because I've seen him try to justify that belief. He can't do it. So it's just something he believes, which is fine. That's how it is for most people. But yeah, so Kent thinks the Earth is a globe, and he's correct about that. And so the vapor canopy, or the water canopy, or the ice canopy, he's gone back and forth over the years, has to be something that's above the Earth, suspended there somehow. So then the only reasonable way you can suspend some solid... Oh, drink for Mothra. Which is something that I forgot to say, is if Mothra or Godzilla come by audibly, we'll take a drink for it. So, Ben, you probably know this. Could you have a solid sphere over the Earth in which every single part of the sphere is maintaining orbital velocity and a,
No.
Yeah, no. Right. Because if you're at orbital velocity at, say, the equator, you're not at the poles. And so, yeah, the whole thing would just collapse immediately. It physically can't stay up. The only exception you could possibly have is if it were physically supported by something, like mountains or something. But then you have the problem of, well, if you have this entire thing, mountains aren't exactly closely spaced. So you're going to have huge stretches of this that are unsupported, which, again, will make it fall, because ice or water vapor don't really have a huge amount of structural integrity. So, whether under compressive or tensile stress. Glenn Hoven, full relation for 200 Argentinian pesos, says, sorry, I feel like I have to say it. I don't mind jokes about Germans in Argentina, but it does rub me weird that the people making them up, such as Operation Paperclip, at the same time we do Project Wemmel. So, yeah, I mean, look, it's not like the U.S. has, a whole lot of places to stand when it comes to inviting in Germans post-Second World War. So, yeah. Look, if you're looking for someone to try to defend all of the U.S.'s foreign policy maneuvers in the last ever, you're not going to find it with me. Naramdaputz, who's been a member for 13 months, says Dapper is a linguist, biologist, T-Rex sports lover. I feel like none of those things are true. I'm neither a linguist nor a biologist, nor, as far as I can tell, a T-Rex sports lover. I'm not even watching the World Series, which is apparently a big deal right now, because I guess the Dodgers haven't been in a very, very long time, and now they're back and they're doing well, I guess. Is that an accurate statement?
I think they were pretty recently there.
Oh, well, maybe
but
not.
They're back. They're back again this year. I know that.
Just like the Backstreet Boys, they're back again.
Exactly.
Okay. See, now I get it. Because apparently I had to relate it to the Backstreet Boys, which is weird. I'm not a huge Backstreet Boys fan either. Nothing against them. I don't know, just don't really, So, okay. Let's get more Kent.
He said, let the dry land appear, which of course would cause some erosion right there, but all that was probably wiped out at the time of the flood. But and then I think there had to be a canopy of water above. I don't see any way around that. But anyway, verse number 6 says, whereby. Now, whenever you see the word whereby, this means it's referring to whatever was before it.
Yeah?
Whereby the world was overflowed. Okay, what's this whereby? Well, you go back to the verse before, it's talking about the water. That water is the same water as what overflowed the world.
Okay, so the water canopy, and also the hydroplate water, collapsed. Well, I mean, the Earth's crust collapsed into the hydroplates below, shoving all that water up, and then the water from the canopy came down, flooding the Earth. Okay, well, you could certainly make up a large enough volume of water to flood the Earth, but the problem is you don't have that volume of water on Earth anymore. You still have to explain where it went, right? Because all of this is going back to where did the water come from for the flood. Roshna Ice Canopy Greenhouse Color for $4.99 says, Ken thinks his ice canopy is like a Dyson sphere around the Earth. Well, that's one of the things about Dyson spheres. They don't actually work. If you want to have a Dyson anything, the best you can do is a Dyson swarm, in which you have a whole bunch of orbiting satellites, all in slightly different orbits that don't cross each other, which collectively generally do not have any gaps in their orbits, such that they're not collecting any of the light from the sun. Which I suppose if Kent wants to argue that there was a complex, mathematically perfect shell of, like, orbiting chunks of ice around the Earth, I guess physically that could persist for a while, but then again, they're also going to be getting the full solar radiation that Earth gets when they're on the day side of Earth, which means that they're going to evaporate very, very quickly, and then that's going to form a ring that won't last very long. So, like, it still doesn't really work, because it's just going to turn into a ring. So, it's one of those things where, like, there are ways where you could get a quote-unquote water canopy with a whole lot of quotation marks on it to persist for, like, maybe a few years. It's very quickly just going to become a water vapor, a ring, and then that itself is going to be unstable, and it's just going to slowly fall down to Earth. I'm mixing up Joshua Geese and Carrie Bronson here. Carrie Bronson, for $5, says, AIG is the subject of a Chuck Tingle book. Oh, Chuck Tingle. I'll take a drink for that. And do you know who Chuck Tingle is?
No, I don't.
Oh, he's the premier author of erotica on the internet today. And he has all sorts of interesting erotic novels about all sorts of different topics that you probably would never expect. And, I feel like he's really more of a comedy writer that writes in, like, the vein of erotic novels than an actual, like, honest to goodness, here's a book to turn you on kind of guy. But then again, what do I know? Maybe some people are really into that. Joshua Geese for $5 says, whereby, try them all. Nice. I get it. Whereby. All right, here we go.
Well, my Sunday school teacher, when I was just a new Christian, 16 years old, his name was Virgil Hartsock. He was a plumber, massive guy, just a great Christian man.
Okay.
And he taught me so many things about the Bible. As a young Christian, I was just soaking it up, And we'd be reading the Bible, and he'd come across the word therefore. He says, now, whenever you find the word therefore, you better find out what it's there for. It's probably a reason for it. Go back to the verse before. Find out.
Hey, look, a joke that didn't land. Let's take a drink.
What the therefore is there for. And I'll never forget that. Put an impression in my mind that it'll always be there. Same thing with the whereby. It's referring to something before it. So the water the earth was standing out of the water and in the water, whereby, in other words, by that water,
Mm-hmm.
the world that then was being overflowed with water perished. The world was overflowed with water.
Ray Gatubello for $2 says, "We sure that Dapper didn't star in a Tingle book?" I mean, a parody version of me might have starred in a Tingle book, but if an actual me, the Dapper dinosaur who runs the YouTube channel, was in there, then that, in fact, is a violation of my intellectual property. And Chuck needs to give me a kickback from all those books, and also maybe send me free copies because I'd be... Gary Bronson for $5 says, "On a related note, Chuck Tingle knows more about dinosaur anatomy than AIG." Oh, no. Oh, you know what? I would not be surprised if that were true, and I'm probably not going to check. It's not a high bar. It's not a high bar.
I don't know how guys like Hugh Ross can teach everybody it was just a local flood in the days of Noah.
Oh, I can tell you how, Ken. It's because that's at least plausibly true. A thing that could actually have happened, that doesn't break any of the laws of physics, that isn't completely counterindicated by literally everything about the Earth and physics. Oh, take a drink for Godzilla. That's how, Ken. See, Hugh Ross is someone who also takes the Bible fairly conservatively, fairly literally for the most part. And so he's very interested in the Bible seeming plausible, in the narrative of the Bible seeming plausible to people. But he also has certain minimal Christian beliefs that he's not willing to let himself modify or abandon or anything like that. Now, I say minimal Christian beliefs, and when I mean that in his estimation. There are, in fact, people who self-identify as Christians who would disagree with some of those minimal Christian beliefs that Hugh Ross thinks exist. But in an effort to make those at least something that is defensible in his mind, from a scientific and historical standpoint, he has to take a look at some of these passages and say, well, I can't be overly literal with this. And one of them is the global flood. Because Hugh Ross knows that the universe is about 13.8 billion years old and the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and that at no point was it ever flooded. He knows that because he doesn't reject science to the same degree that Kent does. So he is trying as hard as he can to come up with a plausible but still mostly literalistic interpretation of the primordial history from Genesis 1 through 11 that he can believe in, and that other people who know what he knows about science can also believe in. I don't think he does a successful job at that, and I also know for a fact that he ignores a lot of evidence. And actually, I'm going to be speaking to one of his buddies, Fuzz Rana, here in a month or two, over on Jackson Wheat's channel. So if you're interested in more about Hugh Ross's channel, keep your eye on that space. So, yeah, that's why Hugh Ross does that. It's not because he doesn't like the Bible. It's not because he wants to dismiss biblical authority. He is trying desperately to hold on to biblical authority, in spite of evidence that the Bible cannot be taken literally in Genesis 1 through 11, especially. So that's how he does it, Kent. And let's see. Fade to Gray, who's been a member for 29 months and is at the annual level, says, Hovind, you're never going to believe this, but words mean things with a Godzilla. Yeah, they do. There's a drink for the Godzilla.
The Bible says the earth was overflowed with water. And it's the world. Sometimes it uses the word earth. Sometimes it uses the word, like here in verse 5, the heavens and the earth. And here it uses the word world.
Okay, but so what? What am I taking away from that? Because one of the things about Kent is that Kent, in his KJV onlyist philosophy, is just completely uninterested in doing things like, I don't know, checking the original source in the original language. So a lot of times when world or earth are translated from the Hebrew in the KJV, they're both just translating like eretz or haaretz, which is just dirt, earth, world, land, all those things put together. Right? It's kind of similar in semantic scope. It's more similar in semantic scope to say, like, the Spanish tierra rather than the English earth. Because the English word earth has started to lose a lot of its connotations about, like, soil and dirt and things like that. Like the physical structure of just a piece of the planet. Instead of starting to just be the name of the planet. This is why I referenced the Spanish. But yeah, it's just that. And I mean... And if it says heavens and the earth, Well, that is usually just a construction that in Hebrew means literally everything in existence. Because Hebrew doesn't have a single word that could map onto like universe or cosmos in Greek. In the New Testament, you hear the word cosmos used, or you see the word cosmos used a lot. But Hebrew doesn't have a direct word that means that. And so they use this construction where they take two opposite ends of something, say this and that, like the east and the west, heavens and the earth, and it means those two things and everything between them, which in the ancient Hebrew cosmology, there's nothing really outside of heaven and earth. That's everything. So when they say heaven and earth, it just means the entirety of everything that exists. So there you go. There's some Bible interpretation lessons for you, which I guess is totally why you come to this science communication channel. It's for how to interpret the Bible. My Unfinished Journey for $6.66 says, Hail Nero, Hail Daps, and Bent. Hugh Ross helped me avoid the atheism/YEC dichotomy when I was a Southern Baptist. Yeah, that's an important thing. Look, I will point out that Hugh Ross, I don't think he's as science-accepting as he thinks he is. He rejects a fair bit of science. However, he definitely is an example of why it's not young Earth creationism or atheism, and that those two things are not like two opposites that are true dichotomies, and you can only be one or the other, and there's nothing in between. Like, Hugh Ross is definitely an in-between. And young Earth creationists generally do not like him for that reason. Because, boy, do they like the false dichotomy. Hugh Ross just won't let him have it. Actually, I don't know, Ben, were you familiar with, or even aware of Hugh Ross when you were a young Earth creationist?
No, I did not know who that was.
Okay. I don't even remember if I did. Although it's been a longer time since I was a young Earth creationist than it is.
Yeah, I know who Kent Hovind was, and that was about it.
Okay, not Ken Ham?
No.
Okay.
No idea.
So the earth was overflowed, the world was overflowed, doesn't matter. The whole thing was completely covered with water. So we're going to try to answer some questions here tonight and for the next several weeks.
Okay, so remember how I said that the word earth can have a whole bunch of different meanings depending on context in Hebrew? It actually isn't strictly necessary, as far as I'm concerned, to interpret it here as the earth instead of the land. Now, you might argue that, well, the highest mountain peaks were covered. And like, okay, yeah, if you want to take that literally true, then sure, the story is telling you about a global flood. But you could just say that that's hyperbole because, the Bible is written by humans who are allowed to do things like tell stories, use hyperbole, use similes, things like that. But if you want to insist that, no, the Bible isn't allowed to use hyperbole, then yeah, I guess you have to kind of side with Kent on the Bible implying a global flood.
Why did God use a flood? Why not just say, okay, everybody die? Wouldn't that save Noah a lot of work?
Yeah, it would save everyone a whole lot of work. And also, he could say target that to the actual people who were doing terrible, horrible things, and not say all the little babies who hadn't done anything. It could make it a targeted actual killing of the people who were causing the problem, according to God, instead of just a huge genocide that wiped out possibly hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of innocents. Seems like a good idea to me. Lennon Hovind, full relation, 200 Argentinian peso, says the translation "the heavens" might be wrong. It looks like dual, but some words in Hebrew just look like that, even though they're functionally singular. Shemayim, heaven, mayim, water, compared to Aramaic, Maya. I mean, I don't have that particular verse handy, so I'm not sure, but I mean, Shemayim does not look dual. I mean, that Shemayim, the im is just the regular old masculine plural. It's not the masculine dual ending. I'm not sure why. What about that particular verse? It seems to indicate to you that it's dual. For those of you who don't know, grammatical number in most languages is as simple as singular and plural. Right? So in English, you have a cup or cups, singular or plural. Some other languages have other numbers that are grammatically encoded, including dual. The dual comes up fairly often in Afro-Asiatic languages like Egyptian, Arabic, Hebrew, Berber. And it is a number that is when you have exactly two of something. In some cases, it can imply that they're a pair, like a pair of shoes, or a pair of eyes or something. But in other languages, it's just anytime you have two of something, you can use the dual. It comes up a lot in classical Arabic. It's much less common in modern Arabic dialects. There you go. That was just clarifying what is meant by the dual. Im is for ayim is dual. Okay, but is there a word that's just sham? Benhoven? I don't know of that word. Let me know. I'm not a Hebrew scholar.
I mean, why have a flood? Why make Noah build this huge boat and fill it full of animals and stay in there for a year?
I mean, the real reason is because this is a myth adopted from other older myths from the area, which were just kind of accepted as just a thing everyone knew about. Everyone knew that the flood had happened, that there had been some big reset. And so this is actually a polemic against other versions of the flood myth, in which the flood is caused by the relative capriciousness of whatever local gods were believed in. And so the Hebrews, wanting to insist that their god was better, created a story in which the actual cause of the flood was some kind of moral ineptitude or something in the part of the people who were drowned, rather than just them kind of being noisy. And so this version of the flood narrative was crafted in order to emphasize that God had particular reasons. The God of the Hebrews had particular reasons for sending the flood that weren't just, well, people are kind of loud and I couldn't sleep well. I mean, that's the real reason, but I'm sure Kent will come up with something.
When I asked Hugh Ross the question, why would God tell Noah to build the boat? If it's just a local flood, tell Noah to move.
Because floods can be local and still too big to just escape on foot. That's why. Okay, I'm going to take a drink because this is incredibly dumb. Ben, remember how Florida flooded earlier? Weeks ago?
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice how not everyone was able to actually leave the flooding area on time, even though they had plenty of warning?
That is correct.
Yeah, that's because sometimes floods move faster than you can. That's it. If a big enough area is going to flood in a short enough period of time, then there you go. That's it. That's a reason. Now you could say, well, Noah had decades. All right, cool. But according to other parts of the Bible, not Genesis, but according to other parts, he was supposed to be warning people. Can't warn people if you're not there. So, I don't know, maybe there's a reason. Of course, again, it's not a story that actually happened. You don't need to justify it. It's just a polemic against Babylonian and broadly Mesopotamian gods. So,
I mean, surely God could figure that out. And Hugh said, well, all of God's prophets in the Bible needed a platform to preach from. And so the ark was his platform. A 450-foot-long platform full of animals and food?
Pretty dramatic. I mean, it's such a good platform that Ken Ham has recreated it. He thinks it's a good platform.
Right. Explain this to me, please. I don't get it. Anyway, he's so desperate.
I love that Ken just does not understand the idea that big things are impressive and make people pay attention.
There's a lot Kent doesn't understand. He's
It's
very
true.
narrow-minded.
Yeah, although I do think he actually does get that, though, right? Because, when he built Dinosaur Adventureland, he included, big wooden cutouts of dinosaurs that are impressively large in order to impress people. He actually does get it. He just doesn't get it in this particular circumstance, because getting it would then mean that he has to accept that it's at least somewhat plausible within the framework that Hugh Ross is working within, and he can't have that. That's not an option.
See, because I don't want to pick on Hugh Ross too much, but what he teaches is just plain heresy. And
I don't think you actually have anything that could even be conceived of as an authority to declare heresy in terms of how that's worked historically in Christian history. You don't exactly have a synod behind you that you can declare that some things are heresy or not. And also, in terms of actual historical Christian doctrine and what things have been declared heresies, broadly speaking, by Christianity, in not necessarily as a whole, but in large part, none of that is actually falling under any of those things. So yeah, sorry, but in most versions of Christianity, the word heresy is not simply equal to the word error when it comes to theology. That's not the same thing. So there's actual requirements for something to be heresy beyond just I don't think it's true. That's not how heresy works in Christianity historically. Now, Kent is perfectly allowed to have his own version of Christianity that's for him and for people who want his version of Christianity. I'm just saying that historically, broadly speaking, Kent does not have the ability to identify or declare things as heresy.
He's a nice heretic, but he's a heretic, okay?
That's even stronger words. So let's take a drink here and mention something here. Okay, so traditionally, in Christian history, the word heretic is not the same thing as someone who believes heresy. So, for instance, when Arius was condemned at the First Council of Nicaea, Arianism was declared a heresy. Now, I'm not here to pick fights about whether or not Arius was the one using the older version of Christian theology, or whether or not the Trinity was an innovation, and any of that stuff. Like, I'm not here for that right now. That can be a different discussion I have somewhere other than the channel. But when Arianism was condemned and Arius was declared a heretic, that didn't mean that literally all the people who followed his teachings were themselves heretics. To be a heretic, generally speaking, you have to have at one point been a part of a church that is now declaring what you're teaching a heresy, and you have to have been teaching it yourself after having already believed whatever it is the church says isn't heresy. So that would mean that Hugh Ross might be a heretic if you could find that he's doing heresy, but he also might not be, because just believing in something that a church body calls heresy is usually not enough to get you declared a heretic. They're not the same thing. So, now, sure, that's getting into technical, like, theological jargon from Christianity, but I just like to point out that Kent Hovind knows about as much about Christianity and Christian history and Christian theology as he does about, say, the anatomy of dinosaurs, which is to say virtually nothing. I mean, Kent is a landmarkist, as far as I can tell, which is the group of Baptists who believe that there have always been Baptists throughout all of Christian history, and they're just, like, hidden little groups, and sometimes they'll point to, quote-unquote, heretical groups throughout history, and say, see, these were Baptists. They were proto-Baptists back in the day. And you look into what those groups actually believed, and it's absolutely nothing like Baptist theology. So, like, no, they weren't. But, yeah, it's how Baptists maintain that they have a continuity all the way through to Jesus. Like, I'm sorry, you guys made up your theology in the Protestant Reformation, and so your historical line goes back to the Protestant Reformation, and then before that, all your ancestors were Catholic until basically before the Christianization of whatever area of Europe you happen to be from. So, sorry, Baptists.
And it's just flat wrong, and it's seriously wrong, because it goes against so many other doctrines of the Bible. Like, why did Jesus die on the cross?
Nothing about a local flood means that Jesus dying on the cross is somehow no longer theologically important to Christianity. If you ask Hugh Ross why Jesus died on the cross, he's going to give you an answer that's basically the same as Kent Hovind.
If there's already death in the world before Adam came, then death was part of God's plan.
Okay, watch this. I'm going to add 3 words. Not for humans. Oh, look, I solved it. I solved the problem.
Brilliant.
Wow. Look at that. Look at that, Kent. Like, has Kent actually talked to anyone who believes in a different way than he does and asked them these questions? Because he could, right? You could have just asked Hugh Ross, like, hey, what do you think the point of, like, the cross is? And Hugh Ross is going to give you, like, penal substitutionary atonement, which is pretty much the typical Western Christian answer. And then if you ask, well, if death was here before, then Hugh Ross is just going to tell you it wasn't here for Adam and his descendants until after Adam sinned. So we still need the cross. There you go. Problem solved. I mean, I don't know why I'm a better theologian than Kent. I shouldn't be.
It's not hard, though.
Yeah, it's true. It's really not.
Well, I get real nervous about that. That looks to me, that puts our red flags in my mind anyway. So, I think some things we ought to consider concerning the flood. Number 1, a flood left evidence. A miracle would not.
Oh my goodness. Where'd it go? All right, well, I guess it didn't just crash, it just erased itself. This doesn't exist anymore. All right, well, first we're going to take a drink for the flood left evidence, because, it absolutely did not. All available evidence indicates that there absolutely was never a flood of Noah. So, yeah, that's a thing.
Earth, he just spoke it into.
All right, so this is actually something we've already seen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute this a little bit while I share this with Bent real quick, because apparently that ended that. Ben, you should be able to see Kent again.
I can.
All right, Savage. They're evolutionizing our kids. Cobra for $4.99 says, and here I thought the cause of Jesus' death was crucifixion. I mean, that's the proximate cause, but if you are a Christian, you usually think that there is a different proximal or different ultimate cause. Sorry. So, I mean, yeah, you're not wrong that it's crucifixion. It's just that usually there's a theological thing that comes in there.
The model that there was water put an impression in my mind that it'll always be. So, see, because I don't want to pick on Heros too much, but what he teaches is just plain heresy. And
we're back to where
he's a nice heretic, but he's a heretic, okay? And it's just flat wrong, and it's seriously wrong, because it goes against so many other doctrines of the Bible. Like, why did Jesus die on the cross? If there's already death in the world before Adam came, then death was part of God's plan. Well, I get real nervous about that. That looks to me, that puts our red flags in my mind anyway. So, I think some things we ought to consider concerning the flood. Number one, a flood left evidence.
There we go.
A miracle would not.
Okay, but Kent, we're now at the point where every single flood model involves multiple physical impossibilities and has also left behind literally no evidence that actually indicates there was a global flood. Which means we're now in a situation where, one, the flood isn't not a miracle in any significant way, right? Because God's going to have to use miracles to get all those stones that couldn't have been formed under a flood to form under a flood anyway. He's going to have to use miracles to get rid of all that heat that every single flood model generates that would have boiled off the entire crust of the earth, never mind the oceans. He's going to have to use miracles to get rid of the fact that he just salted the entire earth. Because you know what salting the earth does? Yeah, it makes it pretty hard for plants to grow unless they're halophytes, which most plants aren't. He's going to have to do miracles to keep all the animals alive in the ark while they're being bombarded with enough radiation to turn them into soup from inside their own bodies. Like, it's miracles the whole way down in a way that just killing everyone like that isn't. That is just one miracle, or perhaps one miracle per person that you do that to. This is like infinite miracles all the way down throughout the whole thing, to be left with no actual evidence. Because remember, when the first people started looking into geology, those people were Christians who basically believed the broad outline of the history of the world that Kent believes. Not exactly, but pretty close. And they didn't find evidence for that. And they were like, well, I guess there probably wasn't a worldwide flood, and if there was, it didn't leave any evidence. That's why you had tranquil flood proponents that thought that the flood was so tranquil and calm that it didn't actually leave behind any evidence. But it still happened, though. Just, trust us. Yeah. So, we already took a drink for it, but, we took a drink for absurd statement that the reason that God used a flood is because it would leave behind evidence, when in fact, there is no such evidence. Now, I do have to say that I am seeing 113 people here viewing the video, or the stream, but only 51 likes, which means that, unfortunately, I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. So, let's hit like, so I don't have to Bilbo you.
Been Bilbo'd.
Yeah, you've been Bilbo'd. Ari.
I mean, if everybody had just died, and Noah's sons had survived, and Noah and his family, and then they would tell their kids, hey, the reason we're here the only ones in the world is because God made everybody die. After a couple of generations, people are going to start to doubt that, aren't they?
As if people didn't doubt the flood anyway, including since there's no evidence anyway. I'm going to take a drink for people might start doubting that God killed everyone after a few generations. The thing that happened anyway. Goodness. Even if Kent is right, that's a really dumb reason. Man, God had to prevent the thing that happened, despite him trying to prevent it. So I guess Kent's God is just really, 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 really incompetent. That's the only thing I can come away with. Kent's version of God is just a moron. Which I guess makes sense, because if Kent is crafting a God in his own image, that God would be a moron, right? If Kent thinks he's made in the image of God and he's a moron, maybe God is too.
Yeah, right. Everybody died? Sure. Gee, you just happened to be the only one, huh, Noah? Yeah, right. Sure. You killed them all, didn't you? Right? I mean, something like that would come up. See, the flood left evidence. We still find the evidence today. You go digging around just about anywhere in the world, you'll find fossils.
Mm-hmm. Fossils are not ipso facto evidence of flooding. That's the thing, though.
Is that what Kent's so-called evidence is just the existence of fossils?
Yeah, fossils exist,
Despite
therefore
Kent
flood.
arguing there is no fossil record in the past?
Yep, basically. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Kent.
Kent, there is no fossil record, says that one piece of evidence for a global flood is that fossils exist. I'm just gonna take a drink.
That's pretty dumb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I'm sure most of my viewers know, floods are not the only way to get fossils. You can get fossils out of floods, but every time you find fossils, or actually most of the time when you find fossils, they're not in flood deposits. We can tell because floods leave behind particular kinds of rock deposits, things like turbidite, graded bedding, things like that. And many fossils are found in things like fine-grained non-flocculated shale, aeolian sandstone, ashfalls, subaerial ashfalls specifically, things that can't be caused by floods. Limestone, again, can't be deposited by. So, no, that is not a good reason to think that there was a global flood. In fact, the actual makeup of the fossil record of Earth is conclusive evidence against a flood. It could not have been caused by a single flood in a single year. My unfinished sock for $2 says, "Darn your socks, time to like and share." Thank you very much. Yes, please do like and share. It really does help the channel a lot.
You still see evidence everywhere you look. When they climbed Mount Everest, they got up to 26,000 feet above sea level and began finding petrified seashells.
Mm-hmm.
There's evidence of this flood everywhere. It's just...
So what is Kent's version of how this works? So, like, the flood covers over Mount Everest. Sea animals have time to make colonies there in which they grow up to, in some cases, fairly large sizes. And then, the flood puts more sediment on top of Mount Everest that then fossilizes the clams and the squids and whatnot where they were growing up as a community on top of Mount Everest. And then they fossilize. The water runoff doesn't erode away the fossil-bearing parts of Mount Everest. And that's why we find fossils there today? Is that... Like, can you think of a more plausible set of scenario that Kent would accept other than that?
It sounds like something Kent would believe.
Yeah, here's the thing. It takes more than a year for most marine mollusks to grow up to full size. So no, Kent, that's not an option. Also, Mount Everest, or the Himalayas in general, are famous for this thing called pink salt. You might have heard of it. Now, it's not going to increase the ion count in the air if you shine a light under it and make it hot. Sorry, that's just nonsense. Even if it did, it turns out that just having a bunch of ions in the air doesn't have any health benefits that have been demonstrated. So, also nonsense there. So if you're a big fan of like salt lamps for anything other than their aesthetic value, I'm sorry, but you're believing silly things. That being said, it's pretty famous. It's pretty, I think it looks very cool. In fact, I do like the salt lamps just for their aesthetic value. But you know what makes them pink? Because most salt isn't pink, right? Like, that's kind of weird. What makes them pink is fossilized algae. Because this salt deposit, or these salt deposits, are actually what are called evaporite deposits from a dried up ocean. Now remind me, Bent, are floods dry or wet?
I think floods are pretty wet.
Okay. So do you think you could have a whole lot of, like, drying of an entire ocean while under a flood?
No, that seems unlikely.
Yeah. So, do the Himalayas provide evidence for a global flood? No, in fact, they counter-indicate a global flood pretty conclusively. What's actually happening is that old seafloor is being pushed up because the Himalayas are still growing to this day. Every single minute of your life, the Himalayas have gotten a little bit taller. Not a lot, but it's happened. Olivia Williams for 5 Beaverbucks says Noah killed millions is a more credible idea for Kent with the Ghidorah. Yeah, I guess so. I'm not sure why he thinks that would be credible. Is that Noah killed literally everyone? That does seem a little weird. So, yeah, no, Kent, I'm sorry, but finding sea fossils on Mount Everest on its own is not enough to demonstrate that there was a flood. And when you take in the entire geology of the Himalayas, when you actually look at all of that, it actually precludes a flood as being involved in any significant way in their formation. So, Oops.
Yelling at us from the rock record. Okay. Secondly, the effects are here for all to see and to remind us of God's judgment on sin.
Alex Markle says, was it you who licked a Himalayan salt lamp out of curiosity? I have not done that. I've never owned one, and I'm not going to go around licking other people's lamps. And even if I owned one, I know what salt tastes like, so I don't understand what the point. So, yeah.
Just like with kids, you have to constantly remind them certain things you don't do. Like my dad always had the paddle on top of the refrigerator with the handle sticking out just a little bit. When you go to get the milk, you see the paddle up there. Oops, that's right.
Okay, one, that was a joke that didn't. Also, it's good to know that Kent was unable to break that cycle of violence. Because by his own admission, he in fact beat his kids to a rather extreme degree that even people who are pro-spanking probably find a little horrifying. And here's another thing. Don't hit your kids. Every bit of evidence says that it does not actually successfully modify their behavior in the way that you want it to. Instead, it makes them more likely to misbehave, less likely to take correction, and more likely to do things you don't want them to do whenever you're just not around. There are other ways to correct your kids than hitting them. Doesn't work. Don't do it. It's just abuse.
Just a little reminder. We need reminded that God hates sin.
Reminding, Kent, not reminded, but that's okay.
Or else we'll do it. And so everywhere you look, you see evidence. And I think we need to train our young people to look at the world as a reminder. When you see fossils, when you see Grand Canyon, these things ought to be reminders. Wow, God hates sin.
I mean, I don't care if those things remind you that God hates sin. That's not a topic I'm interested in. But both of these things are things that are impossible to form. Or all of these things, the Himalayas, fossils, and the Grand Canyon, all cannot have formed during a flood. Except for a few fossils, which could have formed during a flood, because that does happen. So I guess fossils are not evidence against a flood. There's not necessarily evidence for it. And so the Grand Canyon, here's one quick way to know that it could not be the result of a flood. So there are multiple layers in the Grand Canyon, each of which is a different kind of rock. And each of those rocks has different lithification times that are dependent on things like pressure, what kind of rock they are, things like that, right? So it takes a certain amount of time for those things to become solid rock instead of just piles of wet sediment. And if the Grand Canyon were to be eroded before they had lithified, then Grand Canyon would have smooth, low relief wall, or high relief walls. So rather than just being nearly vertical like they are, they would be sloping gently down, and they'd form sort of a U shape instead of the actual V shape of the canyon if you take a look at a cross section. But there isn't enough time in the narrative of the Bible for those rocks to be fully lithified, even today. So, unless Kent's going to come up with lithification miracles, the Grand Canyon is actually basically proof positive that the flood didn't happen. It disconfirms the flood. The flood could not have happened and left behind the Grand Canyon. It's not a possibility. It's physically impossible. It is precluded by everything we know about geology and physics. So, if the Grand Canyon reminds you that God hates sin, okay, whatever, I don't care. But what it doesn't do is indicate that there was ever a global flood.
But it's not anymore to the average student, is it?
I don't know.
To the average student, these are reminders of the evolution theory, aren't they?
I mean, fossils maybe, the Himalayas probably not, the Grand Canyon probably not. Because mountain forming and canyon forming aren't part of evolution. So, kind of hard to see why their existence would remind people of evolution. Kind of a weird thing there.
That's how far we've got our brain off track from where it's supposed to be. Ought to be constant reminders that God hates sin. Thirdly, a warning time while Noah's building the ark gave them time to repent.
Which isn't part of it needing to be a flood. Okay, I'm going to take a drink. Okay. If there's a warning period in which people are given a chance to repent, what matters is the time, not the ultimate cause of death at the end of the time, right? If I say, oh, hey, Bent, if you've got 3 days to take out the trash, or I'm going to set the house on fire, or I say, hey, you've got 3 days, or I'm going to bulldoze the entire house, or I say, hey, you've got 3 days, or I'm going to have the house picked apart by, I don't know, termites.
Nanorobots.
Nanorobots, sure, whatever. All of it is the same. You have 3 days to get rid of the trash, or the house is gone. So what are you going to do? You're probably just going to take care of the trash. Does it matter which one is at the end of that? Not much.
In particular.
Yeah. So if it's like, oh, hey, at the end of whatever warning period, I'm going to drown you, or I'm going to snap my fingers and you're just going to disappear and be gone, whatever, it doesn't actually help us differentiate between which of these would be a good idea. So this point is just, it doesn't make a difference, even on Kent's own terms. Which is actually a thing that comes up a lot with creationists. We'll make arguments that even on the terms of young Earth creationism, like even if I accept the basic tenets of young Earth creationists, these arguments don't make any sense. One of my favorites is birds can't be dinosaurs because birds are made on day 5 and dinosaurs are made on day 6. Right? Because it's the same argument as whales can't be mammals because whales were made on day 5, but mammals were made on day 6. But no creationists make that because they're okay with mammals being split between different days. All you have to do is say dinosaurs were too. So, like, it's one of those type of arguments where even on terms of young Earth creationism, even if I accept all the basics of young Earth creationism, this argument just doesn't actually work. This is one of those.
Tells us in 2 Peter, while the ark was preparing. Can you imagine we don't know how long it took Noah to build the ark, okay? There are a couple of verses that people get confused. Turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 6.
Well, turn in your Bibles, I guess, if you have them. I don't have one handy. I guess I could look it up, but I'm just going to let Kent read it to me. He usually doesn't just lie about the actual individual words in the Bible. Like, when he's reading from it, he usually gets the words right. So, I'll just trust him that this is what's actually in the KJV. If anyone else wants to fact check him, go for it.
Genesis chapter 6, and I'll show you here a couple of only verses we have that really deal with this. And it came to pass, verse number 1, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. Well, now wait a minute. People have made all kinds of crazy doctrines over.
What does any of that have to do with how long it took Noah to build the ark?
Absolutely nothing.
Well, why is he reading this to us?
I'm waiting to find out.
Okay, we're going to see if he tells us, and then we're going to go on a quick break.
For this verse. Let's read what it says. Okay? The Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man. Mm-hmm. I'm not always going to argue with you. For that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. That's all it says. Now, what does that mean? Some people have said, see, God said in the Bible nobody would live past 120. And there have been people proven that they live past 120.
I would be very curious to know who that is. I am not aware of any confirmed instances of anyone living past 120. I could be wrong. I would be fascinated. I've heard reports of people who've done that, but not in ways that could actually be confirmed. Because one of the problems is, especially with a lot of older reports, is that there's no actual way to confirm someone's age. You can say, oh, so-and-so in, 1754 in Cambodia died at 132. It's like, okay, well, do you have, confirmation of their birthday? Well, no, they weren't really keeping records at the time in that village that this person lived in. Like, well, okay, then maybe they were 132. But, I can't verify that. I'm not just going to accept that as the gospel just because you kind of said it. There's a whole bunch of people in that circumstance, right? Where someone who was allegedly 100 and whatever died at some absurd age, and we just don't have a birth certificate or any other way to confirm when they were born. And that's just the age people said they were. People say a lot of things. So, unless we actually have an ability to confirm it, it doesn't matter what people report as the age. And as far as I know, there have been no confirmed reports of anyone living past, past 120. I don't even know if anyone made it to 120. 122 was the oldest ever, says April Van Ryn. Do you know who it was and whether or not we can confirm it? French lady supposedly lived to 124 and is considered the oldest person living. Jean Calmet of France. So let's look into that. And we will really, really look into it after the break. So there you go. All right, we will be just right back. In the meantime, first we're going to have a quick little commercial for Star Trek Lexington, which is my Star Trek Adventures actual play that happens on Top Hats Off. Do be aware that the date given in the teaser trailer is incorrect because we've had to push it back to the 8th of November because of illnesses and time change shenanigans. But after that, it'll be the musical stylings of one Beethoven, so please do enjoy. Next time on Star Trek Lexington.
Captain's Log, Stardate 5896.5. Now that we have finished repairs to the hull, engines, and sensors, the Lexington is once again ready to get back into deep space. We've been tasked by Admiral Banna Stoker to return to Kumbari 2. Apparently, strange emissions have been coming from an unexplored region on the side of the planet opposite of the Aurelian settlement, and we are to investigate. The mission has been marked as high priority and confidential. We're at warp now and are due in the Kumbari system later today.
Kumbari 2 is a verdant M-class world full of lush vegetation and more than a few species of dangerous wildlife. Now it seems to hold a secret buried beneath its ancient surface. The crew must avoid the natural dangers of this untamed wilderness, but it would appear that they are not alone. A familiar face is also interested in the ruins, and not for simple scientific discovery. Can the crew discover the source of the strange readings and avoid being eaten, all before their rivals find the source themselves? Find out on October 25th, 2024, only on the Top Hats Off channel.
Okay, we are back. So, first thing, I want to read off of a super chat I believe came in. So let me just make sure I have it right. Yes, Roshna Ice Canopy Greenhouse Keller for $4.99 said, look up blue zones, places like Japan that seem to have a lot of people over 100, but many deaths were never reported/recorded. And so I probably will look into that. And also, I do want to point out that I did, during the break, as I was getting other things done, I did look into Jean Calmet, and it does look like it has been in fact verified that she was 122. So there you go. Looks like the oldest verified age we have at time of death for a human is 122. So, then I think Pegajace, I'm hoping I'm getting that right, says, counted in the AIG by my own AIG. Thank you. Wasn't expecting exactly that, but hey, I will take a drink for it.
And therefore, there are contradictions in the Bible.
Wait! Before we continue on, I want to thank everyone for being so generous, and because you guys are the reason that the channel stays afloat, right? You're also the reason why Ben sometimes gets free pizza, which he really does like. Because, you know, who's not going to like a free pizza? You want pepperoni and bacon, I think, next time, right?
That is correct.
There you go. So, if you are currently not supporting the channel, but that's something you're interested in doing, and there's a number of great ways. There's a Patreon, the channel memberships. Patreon starts at $1 a month. Channel memberships at $1.99. They both get you access to my Discord server that's just for supporters. They both get you early access to all my scripted videos many months in advance. You can go annual on Patreon for a 15% discount. That's not an option on the memberships, but the memberships do also get you the cool emojis, the green name, the little badge after your name. So there are some advantages to that. Let's see. If a monthly or an annual financial support is just not in the cards for you, or you just don't want to, we also have the merch store that you can get some merch at. There's t-shirts, phone cases, pillow cases. No, not pillow cases, pillows. Sorry, towels, blankets, all sorts of stuff. And if financial support there's also wish lists. Both me and Bent have wish lists for Amazon listed in the description. That's why Bent thanks Joshua Geese earlier in the show. And yes, if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, that's fine. Something everyone can do at no additional cost is like this video, like my other videos, comment, share my videos around, do those things, because that really does help the algorithm notice me. Hillhugger for $5 redo says, did you know that soft tissue in dinosaur fossils means creationists can now do some science by sequencing the DNA and prove birds are dinosaurs? Sarcasm. I did not know that, because it is in fact not true. There is very little chance of sequenceable DNA coming from any kind of Mesozoic dinosaur soft tissue find. So, but thank you very much. All right, let's actually get going now that I got the little commercial bit out of the way.
Slow down just a minute now.
Mm-hmm.
Did God say nobody would live past 120?
I mean, that's what the verse sounds like when you read it, Kent. I don't know. Roshina Ice Canopy Greenhouse Keller for $4.99 says, Dapper isn't drunk enough by midpoint. Should be 30 drinks by now. Pounding stones are what we use on AIG's bag of bacula. Ouch. I'll take a drink for that. And yeah, hey, I mean, if you ever wanted to up the drink counter, I think the fastest way is gifting memberships. But the cheapest way is sending AIG as a bag of dicks in little $2 super chats. So, there you go. Is the fastest or the cheapest way?
No. But they start off with a false idea because God's verse. This verse does not say nobody's...
That wasn't me. That was the original video. I was not expecting it to just all glitch out for us, but hey. Roshina Ice Canopy Greenhouse Keller gifted 10 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. Thank you so much. So there we go.
Pretty cool.
Let's take 10 drinks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Oh, that's a little brain freezy right there. Put fresh ice in. Boy, is it cold.
Nice.
He's going to live past 120. Here's what it says. For that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years.
I mean, that really sounds like people are going to die after 120 years, doesn't it?
I feel like he's saying the same thing, just with different words, but what do I know? I'm just a bent.
Look, if you had to ask me what that meant, that would be my answer as, like, the most obvious thing. I really don't know what else I'm supposed to interpret that as.
Is this God warning them? A flood is coming in 120 years?
Doesn't sound like it.
I think so.
Okay.
I think that's the only way you're going to interpret this. God says, in 120 years, I'm going to destroy the world.
Are you saying that because you think that if you interpret it the way that most people seem to think that they should interpret it, that it therefore verifiably makes that verse wrong? Because if that's your reasoning, then that's just post hoc reasoning, right? You're saying, well, it can't mean this because then the Bible would be wrong. Okay, but Kent, you don't get to just start with the Bible can't be wrong, and then anytime you see any evidence that it is wrong, you just pretend that evidence doesn't exist. That's just lying to yourself, right? If the Bible actually isn't wrong about anything, then you're never going to find an instance where the actual evidence indicates that the Bible's wrong. But if you start reinterpreting everything that you think about the Bible in light of what's reality, especially if it means that you have to come up with implausible and wildly crazy interpretations of the Bible, which Kent often does, it just means the Bible's wrong about that. And here's the thing. Most of Christian history does not really involve the idea of biblical inerrancy, right? Like, throughout most of history, most Christians who bothered to study the Bible, which wasn't most Christians total, but, you know, of the educated ones, the people who were writing books about theology and whatnot, they were okay with there being contradictions and occasional errors in the Bible, because the Bible was a source for theology and not necessarily for history or something. You could just join the historical mainstream of Christianity, Kent. I mean, he won't, because then he'd probably have to join a Christian group that he thinks are barely even Christians, like, I don't know, like Catholics or the Eastern Orthodox or the Oriental Orthodox or something. Or maybe the Church of the East, which Kent has probably never even heard of. Actually, I'm not even sure he's heard of the Oriental Orthodox Church. I'm pretty sure Kent has heard of the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. But I bet he wouldn't be able to tell you what the Oriental Orthodox Church is, or name any countries where it's like the largest group of Christians, like Ethiopia, Eritrea, or Egypt. Sorry, Pope Tawadros, Kent doesn't know who you are.
But I wouldn't be dogmatic on that, but I think that's the best way to interpret that. And some people say it took Noah 100 years to build the ark. I think so, but I can't prove that either.
Well, you were originally going to read verses that were supposed to indicate to some people how long it took Noah to build the ark. Instead, you read a verse that was about either human longevity or how long people had to repent, which isn't either of those things. So that's weird, Kent. It's a little weird.
The Bible doesn't say how long it took Noah to build the ark.
Hey, I agree with Kent. Take a drink. That was right.
Might have taken him 50 years to build it. He might have hired all the neighbors to help. He might have built it in 1 year. The Bible simply doesn't say. But while the ark was preparing, people could see what's going on and say, wow, I better get saved. Now, if you look at the...
Yeah, except according to the text, literally no one did that, Kent. So it was a pretty useless warning, but whatever. Bits of Bias Sheets Rage for $2 says, did God really say Kenthoven, AIG? Dicks emoji. I'll take a drink for that. Yeah. That does really come across as Kent basically just quoting the serpent in the garden. Hath God truly said? Like, yeah, in this case, yes, Kent, he did.
Chart that we have, the chart in the back of the seminar notebook, which tells how long they lived before the flood. The Bible has a verse that just really is, to me, a heartbreaker just a little bit. Back in Genesis chapter 5, and verse number 30. Genesis 5:30. And Lamech, that's Noah's daddy, lived after he begat Noah 495 years, and begat sons and daughters. Noah's daddy, Lamech, for 495 years, 595. Oh, okay. New glasses, can't get used to the stupid thing. All right. For 595 years, Lamech had more children.
Okay.
These are Noah's brothers.
And sisters, presumably, yeah. Alright, let's see. Roach in Ice Canopy Greenhouse Color for $4.99 says, Ken loves to say the word might a lot to fill in Bible literalist holes. Yeah, that's true. He does seem to do that a lot. Then Hillhugger for $5 redo says, but science is what we know, so we get to start with our conclusions, right? I mean, I'm not entirely sure what you mean. Like, we do know things from science, and we can stand on that knowledge in terms of like assessing future claims, and those claims then have to overcome the burden of the burden of proof, I suppose. Although I don't like the word proof, at least the burden of evidence, I suppose, sufficiently that they could overcome science that we already know of, and that's a thing that can happen. So like, yeah, we can use science as our jumping off point for determining what things to believe and not. Things that blatantly contradict well-established science are probably not true. Things that don't are at least plausible. And if you want to indicate that something that is currently thought to be scientifically impossible is actually true, I mean, you're going to have your work cut out. Now, it's a little bit easier to come up with the idea that maybe it's plausible if it's a one-off event, because science doesn't deal with completely unique one-off events. Science only deals with things that are actually like principles of how the universe operates, that are like, things that we can rely on. So it's actually not clear to me if miracle claims are themselves open to scientific investigation beyond the point of saying, well, it's not scientifically possible. Does that mean it didn't happen? Maybe. It depends on exactly what your philosophy of science is. So, for instance, like if you just think that scientific models are useful but don't necessarily reflect reality, then it probably doesn't make a difference as to whether or not you think it's scientifically possible based on what we know now. Whereas, on the other hand, if you think that scientific models are actually getting at something real in reality and actually telling you how the universe really is, then maybe you do think that being scientifically impossible makes something impossible on its own, even as a one-off event. So yeah, that question gets into a whole lot of topics about philosophy of science and just philosophy generally that I don't really know enough about to assess. But I will say this. If something is scientifically impossible, and it is precluded by the evidence, taken together, that is, I think, more than enough to reject a claim. If there's no scientific mechanism known, and it would leave behind evidence that is not here, and we instead have evidence of it not happening, like with the global flood, then I would say, yeah, that's something you can reasonably reject without any particular concern. So, I have no idea if that was a satisfactory answer, Hillhugger. I'm sorry. But yeah, your question seemed to get into a whole lot of territory that is not easily answered with a pithy response.
How many of them went on the ark? None. Noah had brothers and sisters that apparently drowned in the flood. Certainly, nephews and nieces didn't even listen to their own uncle. It's also interesting, if you look at the dates, Methuselah died the same year the flood started. Now, you can't be dogmatic and say it was the same day. The Bible doesn't give us enough data, okay? But he certainly died the same year the flood started.
I mean, doesn't actually give you data at all about the actual flood, because there wasn't one. But okay, I guess that in the context of the narrative, the Bible is in fact giving you data about the narrative, so sure.
Anyway, this building of the ark, however long it took, gave them time to repent. Okay, what caused the flood in the days of Noah? What about Pangea? How many of you have been taught that all the continents...
Who is doing this camera nonsense? Oh my goodness, I just got vertigo. What are you...
Yeah, it's pretty tricky.
Oh my... Oh. We know he has an editor, right? Because they switched to his slides. Couldn't you have just switched to that chart? Do you have to zoom in and then zoom out and then do some kind of crazy bouncy zoom? It's sick looking. Kent needs a better, production staff overall. His production quality is just so low. It's lower than my production quality. And I'm just some jerk dinosaur at a computer. I don't make nearly as much as Kent was raking in when he made this. And that's without, adjusting for inflation. If I adjust for inflation, Kent at this point was making way more than I've ever made. And then just not paying taxes on it, because apparently it was God's money. Because that's a line that Kent Hovind for some reason thought that Uncle Sam was going to just buy. Like, oh yeah, sure, all that's God's money. Carry on, good sir. Yeah, well, that almost a decade in prison kind of proved that wrong.
Used to fit together in a big supercontinent called Pangea. Have you heard of that before? Okay. What about Pangea?
Oh my goodness.
What about the Ice Age? Where does that fit in? And what froze the mammoths? I've got a mammoth, Eric, in the suitcase or in the box. Would you see if you can find that someplace around here?
I like to think that Eric Hovind is now going to pull an entire full woolly mammoth out of a suitcase because it's actually a TARDIS and it's bigger on the inside. I know that's not actually going to happen, but I just think that would be a great thing if we could cut to Eric Hovind pulling an entire mammoth out of a suitcase. That's just my headcanon for what's about to happen.
That would be pretty funny.
Yeah.
Maybe it was in the... Yeah, we had it for the kids out today. What would it take to freeze an elephant? A big, huge, hairy, hippie elephant. To freeze it standing up?
There's no evidence of any mammoth ever being found that had been frozen while standing. So, whatever it is that it would take to produce such a thing, we don't have to account for it ever having happened. So, put that out there. I don't know why Kent would ask that question unless he believes that that's a thing that we found, which, it's not.
Yeah, bring that up too. That's a mammoth tooth. And the mammoth vertebrae. We'll just talk about the mammoths here for a minute.
Do you think he means vertebrae or do you think he means vertebra?
I don't think he knows what he...
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I don't know why it's called why he's calling it a hippie elephant. Upson Sparrow points it out. Although, I will say that him calling it an elephant is not incorrect. Woolly mammoths were in fact members of the family Elephantidae. And they were more closely related to Asian elephants than they were to African elephants. Which also means Asian elephants were more closely related to woolly mammoths than Asian elephants are to modern African elephants. Which, as far as I'm concerned, makes the woolly mammoth an elephant. Because if the Asian elephant is an elephant, and the African elephant is an elephant, and the woolly mammoth is closer to one than the other, then it's an elephant too. I will... Actually, you know what? We'll take a drink for Kent being right in calling it an elephant. Because a lot of people get that wrong, and Kent didn't. Now, do I think he actually knows why it's reasonable to call it an elephant? No. We still got it right, so, he probably also thinks a mastodon is an elephant, which it's not. But hey.
How did the mountains and oceans form?
I mean, orogenies. Orogeny is a technical geological term for mountain building events, and they happen for different reasons, but generally speaking, something causes uplift. It might be subduction, where the oceanic crust plunges underground into the mantle and releases relatively low density lava that then floats up and pushes up the crust. It could be that two bits of continental crust collide, which then just kind of pushes up the crust as if you had shoved two pieces of paper together and then they rise in the middle. So those are two big ones. As far as how the oceans form, I mean, the surface of the Earth has height variation, and there's a lot of water on the surface, so it was always going to pool in the lowest areas. And there's enough volume of water to make oceans. So there you go. Got a few things to read here. Roshan Ice Canopy Greenhouse Keller for $4.99 says, today Kent claimed him being unable to find a globe at a physical store was a flat earth conspiracy. Wait, is that a real thing that happened today? Ken thought that just not having globes was a flat earth conspiracy? Please tell me that's a real thing. Bent, if you could watch the chat to see if Roshana actually confirms that that's a real thing, let me know, because I need to read a few other things here.
Okay.
Savage, they're evolutionizing our kids' Cobra for $9.99, says, the cameraman has learned from better films that camera operators sometimes zoom their cameras, but he has not learned. Yeah. Okay, Vagrant Vagabond of Varian Vistas. Thank you. Says ANG is a vapid vein vase of vacuous veins full of valueless vial vodka. And then sends a dapper emoji, a Mothra, a Godzilla, a King Ghidorah, and an AIG as a bag of dicks emoji, and he will take a drink. Thank you very much. Roshan of the Ice Canopy Greenhouse Keller for $1.99 says, and that's why whales and hippos are whippomorphs. Correct, because they are each other's sister groups. Now let me adjust the donations counter, and also open up my next Mountain Dew, which in this case is a live wire, also a hard.
Nice.
Okay. Here we go.
Why would the world suddenly flood? Could it really rain enough to completely cover the world?
No. In order for it to do that, there would just have to be enough water to do that in the first place, and there isn't, because you can look out, And Bent, what planet do you live on?
The Earth.
Are you there now?
Yes.
Are you at ground level?
I'm pretty close to ground level.
Are you currently underwater?
No.
Okay, well, there you go. That's how we know there isn't enough water to flood the entire Earth. Because if there were, it would be flooded, and it's not.
And I would be underwater.
You would be underwater, right.
Asking for help.
Right. Which wouldn't be coming because everyone else would be underwater, too.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm glad we solved that mystery. Thank you for all your assistance.
Glad to help.
I mean, is it possible to rain that much? Where did all the water go?
Nowhere, because it never existed. But also, I feel like Cotton Eye Joe should make an appearance here, but I don't have the clip handy.
And where is the evidence?
Now, that's a good question, Kent. Where is the evidence? Because you get to produce any in all the years I've been doing this.
My first debate that I ever did, University of West Florida, one of the students stood up in the audience. We had a question-answer time at the end, and this kid said, Mr. Hovind, is it possible to rain enough to cover the world?
Is he going to say the one drop of water thing?
I sure hope so.
Okay, if he does, we're taking a drink.
Nice.
I said, today? No possible way. If all the moisture in the entire atmosphere condensed, it would probably rain about 2 inches.
I have no idea where he gets that number, but I don't really care because I'm not going to check it. And it seems like one of those things was like, yeah, sure, whatever, 2 inches. That doesn't sound immediately implausible. Like if he'd said like 200 meters, I'd be like, no. But like, whatever, 2 inches, sure. Roshan Ice Canopy Greenhouse Keller for $4.99 says, his no globes for sale equals flat earth conspiracy was at the beginning of Kent's live stream today. Oh my goodness. That's... What? Okay, so Kent thinks that the flat earth conspiracy theory is itself a conspiracy to what? Make Christians look dumb because of how many flat earthers are Christians? So I guess it's like a psyop conspiracy? Because Kent doesn't believe it. But the whole bunch of other conspiracies that Kent does believe, like that the Jews are controlling the media and the banks and are trying to establish a one world order, or that 9/11 was an inside job, or that sovereign citizen bullshit actually makes a difference in terms of legal strategy and can actually win a case, those aren't psyops. Those are just true because Ken Hovind believes them. I'm taking a drink. Kent didn't say it on this video, but like, that's possibly the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, oh no, there's no globes in this store today when I was there because of the flat earth psyop. Like, okay, Kent. Oh, man, Kent should have someone around him who's taking him back inside to have some bread pudding because, like, he shouldn't be let out. But instead, all he has are a bunch of cult members who, like, hang off of his every word. It's... If I cared about Kent, I would feel sorry for him because he doesn't have anyone there to take care of him when he says absolutely crazy nonsense. But you know what? He doesn't deserve it.
All over the world.
Even that would cause some problems.
That caused some problems in some areas, but you figure the ocean would raise 2 inches. No, you wouldn't notice that. Okay? If the land had 2 inches of water, you probably wouldn't notice it much at all. I mean, if you lived right on the beach may come up 6 inches or something, I don't know, but it's not going to be a big deal.
It would depend on the slope of the beach, Kent, but sure, whatever.
He said, but you really believe the Earth was totally covered by water? I said, oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So?
Well, we'll get into that in a minute, but...
Yeah, this is the time to get into it. You're talking about it now.
Let's see you and do.
He's just wasting... So much of today's show has just been Kent wasting our time, and I hate it. Savage, they're evolutionizing our kids. Cobra for $4.99 says, Flat Earth is a conspiracy to sell more polar projections to stick it to Big Mercator. So I said this before, but one of the weirdest things about like my life is that long before Flat Earth became prominent on the internet, and I started watching like Flat Earth debate stuff and whatnot, and before I became aware of any modern Flat Earth movement, I was in the physical presence of the Gleason map, the one that Flat Earthers have forever been saying, this is our map. or at least been referencing when they talk about flat Earth. It's the one. It's basically a modified version of what pretty much all of them use, or they use modified versions of it. And it's currently held in the Boston Public Library in their Department of Rare Books and Manuscripts. And you have to go up an elevator, and then you have to check in. You have to leave your bag in a locker, and you're only allowed to take in certain things. No pens. You can take in like soft lead pencils, notebooks, laptops, but you can't take in cameras. You can't take in your own outside books. I think you can take your phone in, but I'm actually not sure about that. And yeah, just on the wall, or on a pillar, I should say, there's a framed map, and it's the original Gleason's 18 or whatever map of the world, as it truly is. The one that says it's a projection of the globe, even though Gleason was himself actually a flat earther. And yeah, it's just there. And I didn't even realize this until later when I started watching things like, flat earth debates on like MC2, Craig's channel, like FTFE. They were all talking about the Gleason map. They were like, wait a minute, that looks really familiar. And I was like, I looked into it, and I was like, it is the same map. It's the map I was physically in the presence of, the original. So, yeah, just somehow, for some reason, I managed to find myself in the presence of the flat Earth map, the original, the one that actually, was first produced by Gleason, and just didn't know how that would be significant to my life later. Tea Time Tea for $5 says Kent intentionally cultivated his compound of yes men. Don't feel sorry for him, Mothra. I don't. That's why I said I would feel sorry for him, but he deserves the life that which is mostly him shouting into the darkness while a bunch of sycophants just say, yep. Roshna Ice Canopy Greenhouse Keller for $19.99 says Kent thinks the pre-flood world had no differing topology, which is just impossible. That it was akin to the water planet in Interstellar, because Kent talks about harmonic waves of such grandeur the fluid dynamics require flatness. I thought he only thought about the the giant tides and waves like that during the flood. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I've definitely been wrong about Kent before, so maybe I am. But that's what I thought he was talking about when he talked about that, like during the flood. The tidal waves, like actual from tides, wouldn't hit anything that's taller than them, and so they would just be able to start to resonate harmonically and get really, really big. But, hey. DM The Rocks Don't Lie Wing for $2 says he'll tell us more in chapter 11 of his PhD thesis. Oh yes, his PhD thesis, in case you guys don't know, has a table of contents with more chapters listed than are actually in the thesis. And so, as we were reading it on this channel, we kept talking about oh, hey, we've only got so many pages left for the next 6 or 7 chapters. Those chapters are getting a little short, and then it just ends, and we never got to most of the chapters, which is just amazing.
It kind of just stops.
Yeah. Savage, they're evolutionizing our kids. Cobra for $4.99 says I've laid eyes on Dr. Mary Schweitzer's T-Rex femur. Now that's way cooler than the Gleason map, I gotta say. Yeah, so you definitely have me beat on that one. Because I would love to see that, and I have not.
Where did the water go? I get this question a lot. Have you had that yet when you do debates or something? Or question, where did all the water from the flood go? Well, first place, one drop of water will completely cover the earth.
Take a drink.
If you spread it real thin.
Which, by the way, it will not. You can do the math yourself. You can find out what's the biggest size for a drop of water. What is the volume of that? What's the volume of a water molecule? Okay, how many water molecules are in a drop? Then you take a look at the volume of a water molecule. You can just sort of assume it's basically a sphere. And then you can use the volume of a sphere formula to come out with basically the area of a cross-section of a water molecule. Then you can figure out the area of the Earth, multiply the area of the water molecule by the number of water molecules, and compare it to the area of the Earth, and you will find that, in fact, no water drop is going to be big enough to cover the entire Earth, because the Earth's surface area is bigger than a single monolayer of water molecule from a single drop. Now, of course, there's also practical concerns in that, you couldn't actually keep all that water liquid while spreading out one drop, because it's going to evaporate too fast, so it won't cover anything. So Kent's wrong in multiple different ways. So, yeah. And just how wrong he is, in some ways, depends on how big of a drop you assume. Because different sources will give you different values for the biggest drop. But the biggest value for a drop of water that I could possibly find is actually something in videos, and I couldn't find a reference that could give me a drop large enough to cover the whole Earth. Does it really matter? No. For a few reasons. One, I mean, so it's going to take a few dozen drops, maybe at the large size, or only a few drops if you go with a large size for drop, but who cares? Because the other thing is, this isn't a flood. Like, no one thinks that a flood is when the ground is wet, which is what Kent is describing, right? Like, if I mop the floor, it's not the same thing as flooding, say, the kitchen, right? When you mop the kitchen floor, you're not flooding it. So that's not what anyone's talking about, Kent. Talking about standing pools of water where there shouldn't be standing pools of water.
In particular, in the context, they're talking about drowning in a flood.
Right.
Also.
Yeah, you're not going to drown.
So how are you going to drown in them? Right? It's just so stupid to think that.
So even if Kent were right that one water drop was big enough to do that, it wouldn't matter because no one is asking that. Roshan Ice Canopy Greenhouse cover for $4.99 says you also have to consider water tension. It'll break if spread too thin. That's true. It will certainly do that. Yeah, because water tension is an intermolecular force in liquid water molecules. And if you spread them too thin, like a monolayer is not going to have sufficient intermolecular forces to form a meniscus. There is that, which will actually make it even easier for it to evaporate. Because if you don't have water tension, that's what holds in water for the most part. So, yeah. That's one of the reasons why, like, if you have a cup of water, it will take a lot longer to evaporate than if you spread that out across, like, a floor full of, like, paper towels or something. Not going to be any intermolecular forces that'll keep it together. Savage, they're evolutionizing our kids' Cobra for $9.99. It says the femur at least as of, and then there's a thing that just says object. I assume is a date. 2022, sorry, on display in the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana, which is, of course, the future site of first contact with the Vulcans. True, Bozeman, Montana, and a statue and a theme park. Yes, the statue of Zephram Cochrane and the theme park, which includes a flight on a replica Phoenix, which sounds like a really good time.
Nice.
Yeah,
It does sound fun.
And if you know enough about engineering and computer programming, you can apparently hijack one of those Phoenixes and take it to go try to get it evidence to exonerate your mom, who's being accused of blowing up Packlet Planet. Of course, you might not need to, because you should trust the system, but I understand why you might not if it's your mom's freedom on the line. So, you know. And if you guys haven't seen Lower Decks, you might be kind of confused as to what the heck I'm talking about. Go watch the Star Trek Lower Decks. It's exceptionally... This is really good. I really like it.
Right?
No.
If you shrank the Earth down to the size of this globe right here,
Mm-hmm.
all of the water in all of the oceans and all of the rivers and all of the lakes would barely fill a tablespoon.
I feel like it would be significantly less than that, but sure, okay. I don't see how this matters.
At this scale.
Okay, I'm gonna take a drink. This is starting to get to me. When someone asks you where the water went, you need to tell them where the water went. And if you need to preface that with, I think there's enough water, then don't just tell me how much there is. Tell me why you think the amount that there is going to be enough before the flood when it's not enough now, right? Tell me about how you think the topology of Earth has changed. Tell me about if you think there was a source of water that is no longer on Earth that was here before the flood, or that came to Earth during the flood and left after. Those are relevant facts. If you ask me a question like, I don't know, hey, Dapper, how did you cook that egg sandwich on a bagel that you had for lunch? And I start launching into a whole like thing about like where wheat comes from and the techniques needed to grind wheat berries into flour, I'm just wasting your time, not answering your question. That's what Kent is doing. And the thing is, I get that this is like his CSE 103 thing, where like he can take time to expand all of his points. But like, if it doesn't matter, then why are you bothering with it? Like, you should still be trying to get people important information. They're not going to be sitting in these chairs forever, Kent. They got up and left. You could have imparted more of your points to them if you just not wasted so much time. Let's see. Savage, they're revolutionizing our kids. Cobra for $4.99 says, I don't have a big enough helmet to understand that. Well, I mean, if you had stole the helmet from the leader of the Packleds, then you would have a big enough helmet. Because remember, the ordering of the social hierarchy among Packleds is based on who has the biggest hat. So, get yourself a gigantic helmet. There you go. Become king of the Packleds. Well, maybe not now since they blew up their own home planet. But,
Not much. So where is the evidence? Okay, let's talk about Pangea. Students are taught all of the continents.
Wait, Kent, you didn't tell us where the water came from or went. And now we're just going to switch to Pangea? What? I have to take a drink.
Where's the evidence? Pangea.
That is amazing. See, you could spread it. Oh, I think the Earth was flooded. Here's my evidence. You could spread a small amount of water over the Earth as a little tiny layer. Also Pangea. Nope. That's not even hypothetically doing. Savage, they're evolutionizing our kids. Cobra for $1.99 says he is smart. Yes, that does sound like something a Packled would think of.
Mm-hmm.
He is smart. But of course, as we all know, Packleds are not terribly. Although they're apparently really good at Frankensteining various technologies into their own ships to make those cool pump ships.
Used to fit together. One big, massive supercontinent called Pangea. This textbook says, yes, boys and girls, Africa and South America seem to be a perfect fit.
I bet it doesn't say yes, boys and girls. I bet that's a part Ken put in, but it doesn't matter.
You've seen this in your school, right? Pangea. Here's the evidence.
Nope, the editor cut to nothing. I'm going to take a drink for that. Come on, man. Get an actual editor. Editors aren't that expensive, Kent. You're bringing in plenty. Heck, Kent, you claim that you're doing this for God. You could probably find a volunteer editor who would do this crap for free.
They will give you to support their theory. They will say the shapes of the continents seem to fit. Similar fossils are found on opposite sides of the oceans, and there are magnetic reversals in lines in the mid-Atlantic ridge.
Yeah, all of that is true, and it's very strong evidence of Pangea. So, but I feel like Kent is going to tell us why it's not. Now, I do want to point out that most creationists nowadays do actually accept that Pangea existed. Answers in Genesis seems to either think that it was the pre-flood world, or that the pre-flood world was Rodinia, and Pangea formed under the flood, and then unformed under the flood, all in the space of a year. So, Kent is rather unusual nowadays in being a creationist who thinks that basically continental drift just isn't much of a thing. Savage, they're evolutionizing our kids. Cobra for $1.99 says, Kent Hovind searches for things to make his ATV go. Yes, we look for things. Things to make us go. Maybe Star Trek Adventures needs more Packleds. Except that first contact with the Packleds was only well into the Next Generation era, so I can't really introduce Packleds in current Star Trek Lexington. So, maybe next time.
They will point out, like this map does, showing the two red dots across in Africa and South America. They say, see, we find these same kind of fossils on opposite sides of the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? What does that prove?
Well, normally, the same species doesn't live on opposite sides of a big old ocean, which means that if you find the same species on two sides of what are now widely separated continents, it kind of implies that they were living in a contiguous landmass. That's what that means. Because unlike humans and their domesticated animals that they bring with them, most animals can't just easily cross big old oceans. Now, is the proof positive? No, because sometimes rafting events and other things like that do happen. But when you put it together with the similar geology, with the fact that, say, the Atlas Mountains and the Scottish Highlands and the Appalachian Mountains all actually fit together into a single mountain chain, if you push the continents back together, when you put that in with the whole mirrored magnetic reversals in the going from the Mid-Atlantic Ridge out towards North and South America on one side and Europe and Africa on the other, when you put all this together, it's pretty conclusive. Yeah. Now, I think Kent might do that thing that creationists love to do, where they'll point out that one thing in isolation is not sufficient to demonstrate the scientific claim in question. And then they'll point out that none of these single points of evidence are enough on their own to come to that conclusion. Therefore, the conclusion is untrustworthy or false, which is not how it works, right? It's the consilience of all of the evidence taken together. Roshna Ice Canopy Greenhouse Keller for $4.99 says, Kent believes north is +1 and south is 0 instead of -1. Yeah, he does actually seem to think that. So he does not seem to realize that the magnetic reversals actually involve reversals of the direction of the static magnetic field of the iron molecules in the rocks in question. He thinks they're just fluctuations in strength, which they are that, but they're also fluctuations in direction. He thinks that this is going between 1 and 0, and it's actually going between 1 and -1, and there's a difference there. Maybe he thinks it's going between 2 and 0. I don't know. Doesn't really matter.
Does that prove the continents drifted apart, or could it prove there was a worldwide flood and those animals drowned and traveled just about anywhere all over the world?
Oh, take a drink. Kent, if the flood moving animals across the world were the explanation for this, then all fossil taxa should not be correlated with locales, right? You should be able to find T-Rex in North America, South America, Eurasia, Africa, Antarctica, but you can't. You can only find T-Rex in certain parts of like northern Midwest America. You can only find, say, Carnotaurus in certain parts of South America. You can only find Nigersaurus in, guess what country, Bent? What country do you think Nigersaurus is from?
Niger.
Yeah. So, like, you can only find it in areas like near the Niger River and whatnot. Yeah, that's because they're called these things. Velociraptor mongoliensis can only be found in and around what country?
Mongolia.
Yep, you got it. So, Kent, your explanation of, well, maybe these fossils are distributed across continental boundaries by the flood doesn't work because fossils are by and large not globally distributed. So, that's out.
I would say it's reasonable to say it's a fact. Similar fossils are found in South America and Africa.
Hey, you know what, Kent? That is true. It is a reasonable thing to say as a fact because it just is a plain brute fact of the world. So good job, Kent. We'll take a drink for that.
I don't argue with that. What does it prove?
Prove nothing, because that's not how science works. But it is only concordant with the idea of continental rift, which we now know to be caused by plate tectonics. So, yeah.
That's what I'd like to know. It certainly doesn't prove the continents broke apart, does it?
On its own, again, ignoring the fact that it's not proof because that's not how science operates, it is not conclusive evidence on its own that the continents were joined at one point. However, that is the only plausible mechanism for this, and it is further evidence which is also supported by other factors.
3-inch galvanized sheetrock screws are used in this building, and they're also used in...
Okay, he means screws for sheetrock, not screws made of sheetrock. Got it. Okay, I was confused. I was like, how do you galvanize sheetrock? Sorry.
Eric's house down the street. That proves it broke apart.
Okay, but Kent, screws are known to have global distributions because of modern global distribution networks for things like hardware. Do you have similar examples for living things that are currently extant, Kent, that are not brought there by humans? Like, is there some kind of, like, broad similarity between, like, I don't know, do you find anacondas in both the Congo and, say, the Amazon? No. No, you don't. Do you find caimans in both the Amazon and the Congo? No. Do you find the same species of squirrel in North America and, say, in Europe? Well, except for introduced squirrels, no, you don't. Why is it that historically raccoons have been just everywhere across North America, but until humans brought some over as pets, they were just completely unknown in the entirety of Eurasia and Africa? See, Kent, that's the problem. You're picking on things that you know are actually bad examples because they have global distribution networks that are intentionally created by humans to move them around. Something that wild animals don't normally have outside of like the exotic pet trade. So unless you're going to posit like some kind of extensive global exotic pet trade network that included plants in the pre-flood world, your example of screws doesn't work. And yeah, L-Train says, get bent, get screwed. I love that get bent emoji. It's a good one. It's surprisingly legible, even given how small it is. I think Vishanti helped me out with that one. I think she gave me the font.
Nice.
I know she gave me the font for the emoji that uses the NASA font, which I think is the liar emoji. No, citation needed. Yeah, gave me that font. Which I then modified just a little bit to make the A easier.
No, it doesn't. Okay. Doesn't prove any such thing. Here's what they don't tell you about Pangea.
Okay.
Africa was shrunk 35 to 40% for the drawings.
Okay, let's take another drink. Hey, Bent.
What's up?
Have you heard of the Mercator map?
I have heard of it, yes, but I forget which one that is.
It's the one that is sort of the go-to classroom map. It's like a rectangle, and it's the one that has like Greenland being bigger than Africa.
Yeah, I remember that.
So that on its own should tell you that. Well, I'll see if you can figure this out. It's a pretty hard one, so you might want to put on your thinking cap. Does the Mercator map preserve the size of landmass? There it is.
No.
Okay, so if Kent were to say try to fit a Mercator projection South America onto a Mercator projection Africa, would they fit together based on the shapes that they are on that projection, even if they did fit together in real life?
Probably not.
Correct. That's all Kent is doing, is he's trying to fit the Mercator version of South America and Africa together, and they don't fit. They do if you cut them out of a globe. In fact, you can do it on Google Earth. Here's what you do. Take a screenshot of South America, rotate to Africa, take a second screenshot, then put them both in as separate layers on like Photoshop or GIMP or whatever photo manipulation program you have. Turn down the opacity to like 50% on the top one, and then just rotate them until they fit. It'll be easy. It's not that hard to do. Yep. Just don't zoom in or out on Google Earth. And yeah, they fit together. Kent just doesn't know that you can't use any old map projection to check for sizes of continents. Doesn't seem to know that Greenland isn't as big as Africa. Like, think about that. That's the kind of thing that most people figure out, like, before they hit 10, right? Like, you'll see a globe and you're like, hey, how come Greenland looks so small on this globe when it's so big on this map? And then someone will explain to you that you can't depict an actual round object on a flat piece of paper without distorting some of it. And this particular projection makes things that are really far south and north look really big. And there you go. That's it. Kent never got that far. Kent, the person who claims to have been a science and math teacher for like over a decade, is someone who gets baffled by size distortion on a Mercator projection. Yep, but hey, Kent here is going to overturn all of science while being about as good at geography as the average flat earther.
Now, when you measure an object, and you're going to determine how much it has been diminished, shrinking. There are several ways to do it. Let's suppose we go from a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper down to a 8.5 by 5.5. Cut it in half, okay?
Okay.
Was it shrunk 50%? Well, if you go from 11 to 8.5, the length from 11 to 8.5 is not a 50% reduction, is it?
Is Ken just explaining scaling in 2 dimensions to me right now? Is that what's happening?
I think he's failing to do so, but he's trying.
He's trying to explain scaling. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hey, that gets into something interesting. Do you know that fractal patterns often have fractional dimensionality?
Interesting.
And that is based on scaling factors. So for non-fractal shapes, right, when you scale something up in 1 dimension by a certain factor, the area increases from 1 dimension to 2 dimensions by the square, not just the linear increase, right? But what if you had a shape whose, say, perimeter versus its area didn't actually scale by whole numbers in terms of powers? You might call that fractional dimensionality, because one of the ways that you could define dimensionality is by how many powers you have to raise the length to indicate the analog of area for that dimensions, right? Like you have to cube volume, you have to square area. What if instead of raising it to the power of 2 or 3, it was 1.7? Then you have a fractal with fractional dimensionality. So see, I turned this into something that's kind of educational. There you go.
Yay.
The area has been shrunk 50%. The length has not.
Yep.
If you went from 8.5 inches wide to 5.5 inches wide, that's not a 50% reduction. And you have to be careful when you talk about percentages, because it's so easy for people to deceive other people. Congress and news media does this all the time, you know. There was a 30% rise in, crime. Well, compared to what?
Compared to what it was before. What?
How does he not know that?
I don't know. I'm taking a drink.
That's baffling to me.
Yeah, that's not even something where you have to worry about, like, the square cube law or anything. Like, that's just from what it was before, Kent. And I'll agree with you that, like, people can use these things to make it sound really scary. Like, oh, hey, murders were up 30% in the entire state of Wyoming. It's like, okay, well, how many were there before? 10. Okay, so this year there were 13? Yes. Okay. Sure. Like, so yeah, people can, like, lie to you. It's the same thing with, like, oh man, this increases your chance of, like, some kind of obscure cancer by 20%. It's like, what were my chances in the first place? Like, 1 in 800 million. Like, okay, I think I'm okay with that chances. I'll take those chances. So yeah, Kent's not wrong that you can use percentages to make things sound scarier than they are, or basically to mislead people. But, like, the fact that he doesn't know what it means when crime stats are up is just baffling me.
Got to really watch these, because numbers and graphs is so easy to be deceptive, and we can get into more of that some other time. But
you know what? Technically, he's right. We'll take a drink. It's like Mark Twain said: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Savage, they're evolutionizing our kids. Cobra for $1.99 says Wyoming has more cows than citizens. That is true. Wyoming is mostly just a big square of emptiness with a lot of wheat, a lot of cows, and a lot of pronghorn. By the way, lots of prong. I remember once I was inside of a fenced-off electrical enclosure that was outside, but it was fenced off. And I'm looking around, and I'm like, there's a lot of scat here. A lot of pretty big scat. And I asked the guy, I was like, what's up with this? He's like, oh yeah, that's pronghorns. I'm like, how do they get in? Is it they jump the fence? I'm like, but the fence is like 6 feet tall. He's like, yep, not tall enough to stop a pronghorn. Okay, cool. Sure. Pronghorns are just jumping the 6 foot tall fence. Whatever. Fine. All right, so it is about time that we wrap things up. Bent, do you have anything coming up that you want to tell people about?
No, I don't.
Don't?
I have nothing coming up.
Not even the next Kent with Bent?
If I did, I would want to tell people about it,
True.
but I don't have anything coming up.
Okay. Well, what is coming up here? First, not tomorrow, Thursday, I'm premiering Frank Turek is Clueless, the first part of a multi-part series about Frank Turek trying to explain things about evolution to us. And Greg Kukul is also there. And Greg pisses Frank off repeatedly, and it's actually pretty fun to watch. So feel free to take a look at that. I believe that's another Clay Dapper video. So if you're a big fan of Clay Dapper, there's that. That will be at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, October 31st, Halloween. So, I don't know, maybe Frank Turk is spooky to you. I really don't know. But yeah, that's what's going to be coming on Thursday. On Saturday, we are going to be hopefully finishing up the Timothy Clary, Ivana Semide, podcast that ICR did about whether or not birds are dinosaurs, because that's a topic that I will never be able to escape as long as I live. I am sure that when I am on my yacht, on my deathbed, which I don't know why anyone would buy such a thing, but anyway, I guess I'll have one. I will be immediately asked by one of my relatives, Dapper, before you die, why are birds dinosaurs again? My dying breath, I will be talking about things like deltopectoral crests, crocodile reverse ankles, and asymmetrical fourth trochanters of the femur. Savage, they're evolutionizing our kids' Cobra for $4.99 says it has Yellowstone, so they have that going for them. Yeah, okay, that's a good point. Yeah, that is something pretty nice about Wyoming. All right, I think caught up on that. Okay, so that's Saturday. Then next Tuesday, which, by the way, is Election Day here in the United States. Bent and I will be on for a special Kent with Bent called No Election Talk. And here's the rule. No election talk. Don't talk about results. Don't talk about polls. Don't talk about any of the candidates. I was going to say either, but I mean any. So, no Jill Stein or who's the Libertarian candidate? I don't remember.
I don't know.
Okay. Not that guy either. I'm assuming it's a guy. Libertarianism skews heavily male. Don't talk about any of those people. We're not talking about policies that either candidate is going to try to implement according to their platform. We're not going to talk about rallies, any of that stuff. If you talk about any of that stuff, you will be timed out. That is the rule. The purpose of no election talk on election night is to give people a chance to take a break from this non-stop coverage about something they can no longer affect. Because by the time we go on, polls will be closed basically everywhere. There might be a few places on the West Coast where they're still open. Whatever. But for the most part, throughout most of that, polls are going to be closed everywhere, and it's just going to be a waiting. And unless you're a poll worker or an election official, you're not going to be able to affect it anymore. Your job is done. You've already either voted or not. So, one, if you're in the United States, please make sure you vote. Early voting is available in most places. Many places you can still register to vote. Many places even have same-day registration if you want to vote and register on the same day. So please go out there, research the candidates, vote. But when it comes to Kent with Bent, that's it. We're taking a break from all the election coverage because it has been pervasive. It's even pervasive in places outside the United States in many cases because U.S. elections affect the entire world. So yeah, that's what we're doing on Tuesday. Please come and hang out with us. Absolutely do not discuss. That being said, we're going to be heading over to the Discord server where I'm going to be streaming to the Discord server episodes 5, 6, 7, and 8 of Power Rangers RPM, which is the post-apocalyptic season of Power Rangers, and it's one of my personal favorites. So if you feel like it, head over there. Thank you again to everyone who's been generous in your donations, your giftings, subscriptions, Patreon pledges, all of that. It really does mean so much. With that, though, we are getting out of here.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovend, Phil Cavara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, North Texas Fossils, John Ackerman, Strawberry Vein, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, Elron Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Calvin Brostig Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Sphincter of Doom, and Lawless. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.